You can start right now, sir. Dubey sir,
Okay.
you can start right now.
Okay. Okay. So, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back again this Sunday. And as you all know, our speaker this morning is Mr. Javier Gomez Rodriguez. Javier has spoken before this group even earlier, but I want to extend a very warm welcome to Javier and also express my thanks to him for being able to come and accept our invitation this morning. Javier, there has been so much demand from people to hear you that I keep writing to you. So please accept my apologies for that. Uh, many of us know Javier, but for those who are hearing him for the first time, I'll briefly introduce Javier to the participants. Javier comes originally from Spain. In his mid teens, he came across the work of Krishna and was instantly struck by its wholeness and ring of truth. From 1975 to 1978, Javier was a student at Brockwood Park School in England, founded by Kay in 1969. After completing his BA in the humanities and an MA in Spanish language and literature in the United States of America, he returned to Brockwood Park as a teacher in 1990. Here he met up with Kay's close collaborator, Dr. David Bohm, and actively engaged with him in the exploration of the latter's dialogue proposal. Javier spent 2 years, that is from 1993 to 95, as a resident scholar at the Krishnamurti Foundation India headquarters in Vasant Vihar, Chennai. On his return to Spain, he conducted a K-inspired inquiry group, translated several K books into Spanish, and became a trustee of the Krishnamurti Foundation, the Latin American Foundation, that is Foundación Krishnamurti Latin America, the K Foundation responsible for disseminating Krishnaji's work in Spanish speaking world. He also joined Krishnamurti Link International, an informal group of former Brockwood Park staff members brought together by the German industrialist Mr. Frederick Gohe, who was K's close friend during the last few years of Krishnaji's life and a lifelong financial supporter of the Krishnamurti institutions worldwide. Javier was one of the main editors of KLI's magazine, The Link, which served as an international forum for the study of the teachings. In 2000, Javier moved to the Netherlands, where he has been residing ever since. He has been collaborating with the Dutch K Committee and continues to be associated with KLI. He edits Frederick Grohe's newsletter and is active in KLI's international network of activities. In 2016, Javier started giving a course offering a comprehensive introduction to Krishna's life and teachings. The idea for his course stems from his sense that they are universal in nature and a potential avenue of significant insight and fundamental change. As such, he feels they deserve the closest study as well as widest dissemination, for they are a veritable education for mankind. As a result of the pandemic, Javier is now offering an introductory course to K's life and teachings online at www.thebookofyourself.com. So anybody who's interested can join that. Javier is currently working on compiling a book on Krishna's life and teachings based on research for the course. And we all look forward to publication of this big book in near future. With these words, I want to thank Javier once again for being with us today. And Javier, as you know, you can take for maybe an hour and then leave about 25 minutes for people to ask questions. Yes, Javier, it's your turn now.
All right. Thanks very much, Mr. Dubey, and thanks very much to all of you for the invitation to share once more in this inquiry together. Um, I'll see if I can keep it brief because this is a difficult subject, and I think it's more a matter of asking questions than of giving answers at this point. The question of time has, of course, been, as we are all aware, been very much present with humanity for a long, long time, both physically as well as psychologically. Physically, I'm not qualified to go into that, although we will have to address it. Physicists, that's why I was saying earlier that it would have been nice if Professor Krishna was here, because if the questions arose about time in physics, he could answer those. I can't really. But the question of time has also been very important within the so-called spiritual or psychological realm. And that's mostly, I think, what we're going to address, though there may be a connection between the two, so-called physical as well as psychological time. For me, the question of time actually has been quite important personally. So I think maybe I would start with that. When I was a boy of about 8 or 9, I became aware, or I had the feeling, that the people I lived among and to which I belonged had no history. But I wanted to find out who I was. So that was very interesting. You see, the question of who one is and how one looks for that identity or that definition within a history. That if one doesn't have a history, one doesn't know where one comes from or where one belongs or what kind of culture, what kind of models even there may be for one to follow in life. What identity, therefore, to take on. It's very interesting that we do right off seem to look for our own definition of self in the knowledge and of history, in the past. Where do you come from? So the notion, the very question the kids ask, the child asks, where do I come from? Has an origin in some past. We are descendants. We come from a line of people. Who are these people? What are they like? What do they maintain? What am I likely to embody as the inheritance of that line of people, right? So that seemed like a natural question. Even today, worldwide, we see that operating, that all identity implies a history. So time is inbuilt in the very notion of who we are, collectively as well as individually. We'll look at that a little more in detail. But this little kid, being curious about this history that seemed to be missing, he started looking, because what he was hearing, that was me, of course, but he's in the past, so I thought I call him he, the third person. That little kid was hearing stories from his family. Your ancestor so-and-so did this, and the ancestor did that. And there was nothing interesting there. A few anecdotes here and there, nothing of particular transcendental significance, except for one or two. So I wanted to find textual record somewhere, and there was a trunk in the attic where they kept the family memorabilia, all the things from the past, photos from here and there, this notebooks and so on. So I said there must be some writing up there, because my grandfather, one of my grandfathers, had been a storyteller. But we come from a rural background, a peasant background, and it was still an oral culture. There was no writing. So I was disappointed to find that my grandfather left no written record. But that little boy had an insight. At the moment when no record was written there, I realized that, as a matter of fact, the record of human history is already written. Because as human beings, we're likely to repeat the same pattern of behavior, of experience that our ancestors did. So it's not a matter of detail so much as that the pattern is already established. The very development that one is likely to undergo as a human being, growing from a child to a man, and from a man to an old man, and then, die. The whole dynamic of learning things, of developing a capacity, entering the householder stage, getting married, having children, doing one's job, meeting one's social responsibilities, then, maybe possible withdraw a little bit and go into more contemplative mode of the stages of life are likely already to be followed. And inwardly, psychologically, the structure of desire, of pleasure, fear, pain, knowledge, identity are already established. Or are they? This is the question. Is mankind as such, because of the inbuilt patterns of experience that dominate human consciousness, condemned to repeat itself time and again? But if it is so, then what does it mean to live? That was the question this child had. Because if one, by being born, enters into the dynamic of time, the repeating pattern of human experience, then how can we be said to be alive? In the sense of living means the new, something new, something that has not been before and will not be later. But if I am just the continuation, the incarnation, not even incarnation, the reincarnation indeed of that structure of consciousness, then what does it mean to live? I've been living with that question ever since. And curiously enough, Kay is one of the great teachers in whose teachings the investigation into the question of time is essential. It's like the key. The ending of time is the beginning of freedom. Now that's an extraordinary thing. And time is the enemy of man. You see this? We come back to the enemy. Why would he say such a thing? I was very, very impressed by this statement. He said, whoa, wait a minute. How can you say that? Right? Enemies, I don't like the word enemy to begin with, because it means a struggle. It means a fight. It means a conflict. In what sense is an enemy? Because it's against us. How is time against us? Because we are, psychologically speaking, the inventors of time. And if we are the inventors of time, the creators of time, then we are our own enemies. But that's madness, right? That's complete alienation from within, that we have done something, perhaps intending something good, which has turned against us. Is that so? So we're going to maybe hopefully probe a little bit into it together. Now, Krishnamurti makes this distinction. By the way, he was not the only one to, just as a detail, was not the only one in the spiritual field to make an inquiry into time as relevant to the transformation of man or the wholeness of man, of humanity, really. He used the word man as a shorthand for humanity. Because even in our Christian tradition, which is different, a little different, we have St. Augustine, who he wrote what he called his Confessions. It's a very beautiful little book. Of course, it's all in Christian terminology, so that might not be too relevant. But he was a philosopher by training, and he was questioning himself because he was aware of his own contradictions. And curiously enough, in his Confessions, he had a whole chapter on time. Now, you know what confession means in the Christian world, right? Which means you confess to that which you do or are, which goes against the good. So that in the process you may come to terms with it and maybe dissolve it, so that integrity is restored to the soul. Right? That's the idea. But why, I asked myself, why would he put time in there? So that means time is a sin. You confess to your sins. And a sin is anything that separates you from wholeness. Right? That's the definition. They say God. I avoid the word God, but it doesn't matter. From wholeness, from holiness. So why time? Well, yes. He was one of the first, as far as I know, philosophically in the religious field, to address this question of time as being a sin, without any moral connotations on my part, but one factor that separates humanity from its own wholeness. I said, whoa, whoa. But in the Christian world, that inquiry has not been, as far as I know, has not been carried any further. Whereas Kay, I think, is perhaps the teacher who has gone further into this and has seen to the, well, he has seen to the depth of it. So we'll see how far we can go in even comprehending the depth of what he had to say in this dimension. So Kay usually begins by asking, what is time? Now, St. Augustine was famous, was somewhat famous, for saying, look, if I use the word time, everybody understands what it means, seemingly. But if I ask, what is time? Nobody knows what it is. So that's a problem we have right off the bat in the use of the word time, right? That we say, oh yeah, I say, what time is it? He says, it's now this, right? What time are we meeting? 7:30 in the morning for me, 11 o'clock for you. We have a world clock, right? So what time is it? But what is time? It's a bit more difficult to answer. And of course, Krishnamurti distinguishes between physical and psychological time. Now, even physical time, as I was suggesting, is complex when the physicists probe deeper into subatomic reality, right? The domain of subatomic particles and so on, when it comes to relativity and worse, even quantum mechanics, then time becomes a very fussy and complex issue. So I wouldn't even pretend to know what time is physically. Kay accepts it in an ordinary sense as a reality, because we also have the question of illusion, right? Is psychological time an illusion? Krishnamurti says, no, the physical time is not an illusion. Well, there are problems with it. But what is physical time even as we ordinarily understand it, right? So that may give us a sense of how we came upon this notion. So there is a sequence of things, right? A series of a movement of some kind. How did humanity come up with a calendar? Now that took a lot of observation of the movement of the planets and the sun. We naturally observe that there are so-called days. The sun rising, well, actually the earth turning, but the sun rising and the sun setting. A series of days, and if you live like I do, like I've lived most of my life, in a temperate zone, then you have very clearly marked pattern, yearly pattern of the seasons. So the warm, the not so warm, the cold, and then all that goes with it. The pattern of life is adjusted to the very pattern of the movement of our planet around the sun. So there is a cosmic dimension to time, but what human beings observe right off from the beginning is that this movement obeys, seemingly, a stable pattern of recurrence. That means that it turns around on a regular basis and is stable enough to count on it to continue on the same basis, at least for a predictably long time. So time, physically, at least at this ordinary level, would seem to be a measure of movement as it occurs, a pattern, stable pattern of movement, of recurrent movement. You understand? Stable pattern, because this repeats and sustains itself, and is recurrent. It comes around with regularity. That's why we can measure it. That's why we can divide it. How could we divide a day in 24 hours? If it was shifting, right? Or the year in 365 days, if it was not shifting. It's shifting enough that we have to add 1 day more every 4 years, right? So it does shift. Our measure is not so exact, but it's pretty good that we only have to add 1 day every 4 years. We are pretty good. You know, man is the measure of all things. So it's measuring this stuff, right? So there we go. So this is interesting, that time implies regularity, implies returning patterns, And these patterns are inbuilt in the order of the cosmos. That's the idea, that we have detected order, and time is part of that order. So that time is not our enemy. Hopefully, is hard enough anyway to live within the pattern of physical time. Because look what happens to us. You see, everything in the cosmos would seem to be imbued, determined by time. Time exists because there is manifestation, because there is matter, because there is life. Without form, without matter, would time exist? So the moment the creative force, whatever the creative original force, decided to explode into this massive expression of material existence, time came into being. This is the idea, right? Time was not in the beginning. Time began when this happened. But there was a time when there was no time. That's a contradiction, of course. But there was a moment when there was no time. And maybe this is the religious idea, the religious notion, that timeless state is still here. It has not ended with the movement of time. That the movement of time is actually a movement on the surface of the timeless. And that goes for the outer as well as for the inner. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing to consider. The depth of consciousness may contain in itself that sense of the timeless also. Whereas normally we see time, consciousness, as strictly confined to the movement of time. So that's also important to consider, as I will mention a little later. So here we have this universe, so-called, which time and matter seem to go together. And we come out of that matter, and as life is a peculiar form, because it's no longer so-called inert. It's something alive. The beginning, the emergence of life out of this ground is itself a miracle in the universe. Though it may express, again, something of the essence of the universe itself, the sense that life actually represents, in some implicit way, that very origin of creation. See, this is all very beautiful when you consider it in this larger perspective. That we are just not these little monkeys hopping around this little ball, spinning aimlessly in space. But actually, there is an implicit, as the creatures that we are, an implicit bond with the creative force itself. So that's also where the religious movement takes its basis, it has its foundation, in the sense that the movement of matter does not have to necessarily deviate us from the origin of that material movement itself, that it contains its own origins implicitly in what it is from moment to moment. Well, I like to live that way because then time and the timeless can go together. If you look at the religious conception of our own existence, at least as far as I can have been able to understand, maybe it's a Western perspective, so do bear with me, is that in the Western religious notion, there is a historical linear movement of human history. Right? The Judeo-Christian tradition, the Bible is a history. It narrates the history of a people in a linear way. But actually the intent is not linear, is not to tell a story, but to see how these people, and therefore all humanity, might be able to live in time, but from the perspective of eternity, from the vertical perspective of a timeless movement, because only that timelessness ensures that we act correctly. I think that was a very deep insight of humanity, to consider that actually to live in time is inevitable. There is going from here to there. There is growing from child to man and dying. There is action. There is cause and effect. There is beginning and end in the movement of action. But at the same time, permeating it all and necessarily offering a completely different perspective that surpasses, goes beyond the whole structure of causation and time, is this vertical perspective of the timeless, which is goodness itself. So the whole question of humanity from the religious spiritual perspective is this: can we live this way? Is it possible to live in time with a time from a timeless perspective? Right? So this is the question. And I think that's Krishnamurti's question. Krishnamurti did not really deviate from that question. It is the same question that humanity has asked in the religious field for ages. So, time, matter, causation go together as far as we are understand, right? Life springs from matter, and life itself is also evolution. The question of evolution is naturally implicit in time. We have evolved. Now that has been demonstrated, right, by scientists. They looked at it, they took a voyage, they gathered birds, and they looked at turtles and all that. They went to the Galapagos, and they, good old Darwin, in his scientific voyage, he came up with this, and Wallace did the same everywhere. So there we are. One species has given right to another, from the first organism to a very complex organism, from simplicity to complexity, from elementary to this. And this took millions of years. What is not in time then? That's another question I ask myself. What is really not in time? Does it even make sense to ask the question of the timeless? Right? Because even our bodies are the result of millions of years of evolution. Everything you touch is, the substance of it seems to be time, because it's matter, it's causation. It had an origin. It now has a form that it has acquired through a movement of time. So time seems to be pervasive everywhere. Now, we also, however, interestingly enough, most of us, very likely, if not all, have had this experience, if that's the word. I know Kay doesn't like the word experience, and I'm with him in that also, because experience means time. So he wants to avoid the word. But we have, in those moments of real deep creativity, when we were truly happy, free from problems, we had a sense of timelessness about us. The consciousness, human consciousness, is capable of sensing this timelessness. And that, inwardly, the feeling of it is of a wholeness. It does no division. It's not me here with my memory, with my desire, with my will, trying to force something onto reality and controlling it and seeking to fulfill my own self-interest. That's a movement of time. But is that self, which is so central to the structure of consciousness, has itself disappeared. For whatever reason, for a little moment, it has been suspended, and something else has come into our lives, which does not have the feeling of time at all. So time belongs to the movement of consciousness, as we know it, of time, thought, and self. So time, thought, and self, psychologically speaking, seem to constitute a kind of nucleus, a kind of structure, which has come to define us as human beings. And within that structure of thought, time, and self, we pursue becoming. Krishnamurti says this is the movement of becoming. The moment I have a notion of myself, I must become. It's inbuilt in it. Now, I was surprised not long ago, just recently, reading through Krishnamurti's collected works. I forget where it's at. I think I have it here. To find it's volume 5 of Krishnamurti's collected works. And I came upon a text, a comment by him, in which he describes the structure of consciousness, the layers of consciousness. And I think that's important and relevant to our conversation today, because it suggests that time is actually one aspect of consciousness, but not the totality of it. And that's very interesting, because this is what we're talking about. Is there a balance, or they are really enemies? Is there a place for time? Obviously, there is a place for time in the physical organism. And there's also a place for becoming physically. If I don't feel well in my health, and I recently wasn't feeling well, then I do something about it. That is the intelligence of the body. He says, you are not feeling well. Something is wrong with your body. So you go and do something. So from feeling badly, you become better. So there's a becoming that sense. It's implicit in time, in our organic existence, to become. But psychologically, is it the same? Now, I will read you this text because I think it might be interesting to consider that Kay did have a sense of the layers of consciousness and of the totality of consciousness, and where time fits and where it doesn't. Okay, so I just read that to you. This is from, let me see where it's even from. Is that Collected Works, volume number 5, and it was the 6th talk in Pune in 1948. 6th talk in Pune in 1968. He said, as I said, consciousness has different layers. First, there is the superficial layer. And below that, there is memory. So what's the superficial layer? Just what we normally do. Maybe even speaking like now, maybe a superficial layer of consciousness. My desires, the memories, the fears, all that occupation that we know as the ordinary level of consciousness and which we are more or less aware of, right? Some of it, of course, is unconscious even there, right? And he says, first, there is the superficial layer, and below that, there is memory. Because without memory, there is no action. So thought operates, the superficial layer, operates from memory, which is the substantial ground on which thought draws, both for its objective knowledge of reality, as well as for a psychological movement of desire. Right? It draws on memory. Without memory, it wouldn't function. So thought for him is time. Remember? This whole issue of memory being the foundation of thought, and we being based on thought, man as the thinking animal, we are time creatures psychologically, necessarily, bound to time and bound to memory. So depending on the memory, so we think, which is interesting, right? Because that's the conditioning. We are fixed by our background, that fixes our memory, and our memory determines our thought. Maybe it's not all that deterministic, which is what Krishnamurti, that's why the possibility of freedom is always there, according to Krishnamurti. But in the normal operation of consciousness, it's pretty mechanical. It goes back practically to cause and effect, to the very inertial movement of matter. And Kay has no qualms about saying that thought is matter, because memory is matter. So you see, the inner as a material movement reflects the outer as a material movement, and time is inbuilt in both. But they're of a different nature, so we watch it. So he says, below that there is memory, because without memory there is no action. So we need memory anyway for action. Underneath that, so under memory, there is the desire to be, to become, the desire to fulfill. Whoa. So he seems to discover that actually the motor that drives consciousness from this background of memory and thought is this desire to become. I don't know for sure if that's the case, but this is where he places the very motivation, central intent of consciousness as the movement from memory and thought and time is the will to become. I call it the will to become. He calls it the desire to become, the desire to fulfill. And you can see that that is true for most of us. That in time, when we are in time and we use time, and how time becomes so important is because it's the means for us to fulfill, to become. And not just outwardly in terms of material possessions or achieving some, realizing some, the fruition of some talent or whatever it is, or providing security, but as being ourselves, that the self necessitates becoming as a means of confirming its own worth and giving meaning to its own life. So it's much deeper, I think. But he adds, and this is interesting, if you go still deeper, so deeper than the will to become, the desire to become, deeper than thought, deeper than memory, deeper than the desire to become, underneath that there is the desire. Well, if you go still deeper, you will find a state of complete negation, of uncertainty, of void. So he's still talking about consciousness. This whole totality is consciousness. Normally in his discourse, he reduced consciousness to just the movement of time, which would be these three upper layers of the superficial, memory, and becoming. But he says, no, underneath that. So consciousness has another layer, as it were, or maybe it's just where the emptiness in which this movement of time is vibrating, which is empty, which is nothing. It's total uncertainty. This is interesting. We don't want to live with uncertainty, see? That's why we lean on knowledge. Right? So he says, this whole is consciousness. If you go still deeper, you will find a state of complete negation. Negation of all these things. These things don't enter into it. Uncertainty, because there's no knowledge. Of void, the emptying. And you remember his definition of meditation as the emptying of consciousness of all its content. Well, it's actually the discovery of, maybe also you can look at it as the discovery of the emptiness that actually is as the foundation of consciousness itself. That's another way of looking at it. This is obviously timeless because it doesn't have the movement of memory and it doesn't have the movement of thought or matter. Right? It has no cause or effect entering into it. If we want an end to karma, this would be it. And hopefully we don't reincarnate again. He says, and as I finish, now as long as there is the desire to be, to become, to achieve, to gain, there must be the strengthening of the many layers of consciousness as the me and the mine. And the emptying of those many layers can come about only when one understands the process of becoming. That is, as long as there is the desire to be, to become, to achieve, memory is strengthened. And from that memory, there is action, which only further conditions the mind. So, this is his sense of humanity having developed. We as human beings have developed this field of time as consciousness, and we have invested our being in this movement of becoming. But being, this becoming negates being. He's saying that time is actually, time as the means of becoming, the means of achievement, the means of change, is an escape from the actuality of our lives, at the basis of which there is this timelessness already, this sense of emptiness from this cause effect, this movement of becoming, fulfilling. So this is very interesting, because how does Krishnamurti approach the question of time? See, fundamentally, when he talks about psychological time, What does he talk about? He talks about the movement from what is to what should be. This he calls becoming. Right? So I'm violent, and he always brings it down to brass tacks, as it were, that we do have issues and we want to change. So we say, all right, if I practice nonviolence, he used to bring this thing, right? I am violent, and naturally I realize the problems that creates. So I don't want to be violent. So I should not be violent. So the should comes very quickly in as a moral instruction, right? I should not be violent. So what do I do? Well, maybe I practice nonviolence. So the system comes in as to how I can counter my violent impulses, right? Next time I will not shout at my servant or at my son or at my neighbor or at my boss or at my whatever. We give instructions to ourselves which are not generally don't function well, don't really deal with the problem. The problem is in the psyche itself, and it needs to be looked at. So the looking is more important than the system, because without understanding the structure of violence, because it's structural, is already part of our conditioning. It's time. Violence is time. Violence is my animal background. So imagine how long that goes and how much savagery there is behind that already as an animal. And then there's my own cultural conditioning, my family. Was my family aggressive? Then I'm likely to be aggressive. And the world is aggressive anyway, so I had to protect myself in school from all the bullies. So aggression is built up in a series of layers from the very animal background, the territoriality and desire and all that comes from the animal. But we develop it through our particular conditioning and even culturally. Look what is happening in Europe, right? We have a war. We were talking about it yesterday with some friends. How to understand such a brutal thing? Any war, anyway, we're all preoccupied with our own war. But any war is the same. So that is the extreme act of violence. But you can see how time is inbuilt in this thing. Why time is the enemy. I want to bring it to the field of battle. Right? That is not really, we are not talking abstraction so much. Right? That what is happening in Ukraine between the Russians and the Ukrainians, in spite of all the ambiguities that they throw on the news and the media, and the hypocrisy generally of all politicians anyway, there is something that can be perceived in terms of time. And why time is the enemy. It is the enemy. It's the enemy of the Russians. And it's the enemy of the Ukrainians. It's the enemy of every identity. Because every identity separates. Look, Putin is somebody who embodies a history, has identified himself with a notion of something that is greater than him. You see, we seek the greatness of ourselves, we become. It's becoming. Look at it. It's becoming. I become by identifying myself with the state, with the past glories of my nation, my people, my ideology, my religion, my belief, whatever my is. You see, the me and the mine are intrinsic to the movement of becoming, because without them there is no identification. Without identification, there is no self. This is time. This is history. This is becoming. And this is destructive inherently because it divides, it separates, creates a structure of power in which there must be the oppressor and the oppressed. The me and the not me. The me and the other. And the other, if I have power, is to be destroyed. Time is a great enemy when it goes into this psychological groove. In India, you have the same. Everywhere there is division between races, between religions, between castes, classes, you name it. We are doing this because we're in the process of becoming. If becoming is not there, what is then the movement of life? may be completely different. For one thing, maybe violence is at an end. The ending of violence, therefore, is not a question of time, because time needs to be taken out of it. From this perspective, see, it's a new perspective for me to consider that time is inbuilt in violence. Time is the nature of violence because it is structurally, psychologically in this way. So time needs to be taken out of our psyche in order to end violence. As long as we live in time, in this movement of becoming, we based our identities on a historical process and they are structuring it according to power and division, we are bound to be violent. In a way, you can say, and I'm extending it maybe a little, but just for the sake of maybe probing deeper, that the creation of time as becoming is violence itself, is the destruction of the wholeness of man. That's why time is our enemy, which means we're enemies to ourselves. In the movement of becoming, Krishnamurti says, denies being. Being is nothing. Being is not a thing. Being has no time in it. And we've come upon this, or this has come upon us on occasion. So we actually are aware of the fact of its existence. But somehow consciousness has a tremendous power. Consciousness as time, the self, has a tremendous power to maintain itself in existence and not to leave a single gap through which the timeless can emerge, though the timeless is pervading it. As Kay said, the ground of thought is no thought. The ground of time is no time. The ground of things is no thing. Whatever exists is in the void. The emptiness is the creative factor of existence. Time is repetition psychologically. It falls back in that same sense of the stable pattern of recurrent movement. That's where we seek security. That's where we seek to affirm our being psychologically as material entities. But psychologically, there is not, matter is not being. It's only becoming. So that's why Kay talks about denial, negation. Is it possible to see through the danger of time, the limitation of time, the illusion in the sense of it creates its own spectacle, but at the end of the day is covering up the actuality of that emptiness which underlies consciousness? We like noise because we're afraid of silence. We pursue possessions because we're afraid to be nothing. And we are afraid to be nothing in not having anything. So to have is to be, a mistaken equation. Right? The weariness of time, though, gets to us eventually, right? In that Shakespearean quote from one of his great tragedies, Macbeth, right? Poor Macbeth is driven by becoming, by ambition. He wants to be king, and he wants to force his kingship by killing the actual king who is a guest in his house, right? But he has to maintain that structure of power and violence. So he becomes his own enemy by his ambition. He forces the situation, commits a crime, and at the end of the day, he has enemies everywhere. So he gets weary of time, right? So he says, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Creep in this petty pace from day to day, till the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Isn't that the case? All our yesterdays have lighted us fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life is a walking shadow. It is a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. I think that K's teachings document this journey of the sound and fury of the self, which at the end is underlined by this emptiness, and it means really nothing. I'll leave you with that discomforting thought so we can have a bit of a dialogue. All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Javier. Thanks a lot for taking us through this journey of time, both the chronological time as well as the psychological time, and how they really are enemy of all of us. I just want to make one small comment and want you to say something about it. You know, before a child is born, it has, the moment it comes into the womb of the mother, it inherits the genetic conditioning, the cultural conditioning. So before it has any memory at all, it has those conditioning which are part of his consciousness. Since it has no memory, but it has instincts. For example, if you not a newborn child, but maybe 3 4 weeks old, it recognizes sound. You know, if there is a loud sound, it startles suddenly. Similarly, if you bring something very close to the child's eye, it's able to close the eyes. So uh, it's not that our responses are totally dependent on memories, because we inherit instincts from our biological or uh, genetic conditioning. Would you agree to this?
Well, yes. I mean, as far as I know, no expert in this, but it seems to me that the very organic nature of things, this is phenomenal, extraordinary thing, isn't it? That the body itself inherits a certain intelligence in the sense that it's organized to protect itself right from the beginning. So self-protection is inbuilt in the very organic nature of existence. Kay talks about the intelligence of the body, right? So that intelligence, and also very interestingly, see how it gets very subtle, right? Because he says very interesting that the intelligence of the body is part of the cosmic intelligence. He even talks about the intelligence of thought, which sounds almost contrary to everything he says. Right? That thought has its own intelligence. You can say that that is true if you look at what all thought has done. Has its own capacity for order, for comprehending in certain domains. But something goes wrong within the domain of thought and consciousness, whereby we lose sight of its true nature, it spills into fields where it does not belong, creates havoc, and that's not intelligent. So somehow there's somewhere along the development of humanity, that's the feeling, I may be wrong, but the feeling is there is this physical intelligence, there is even a psychological intelligence, but it goes wrong in the development of not just of one human being, but of mankind as a whole. When Krishnamurti talks with David Bohm in the beautiful, extraordinary series of dialogues of the ending of time, he starts by saying that he has this feeling that mankind has taken a wrong turn. Now that sounds very prophetic, doesn't it? That echoes right back into the feeling of humanity that something went wrong with us from very early on, right? So Kay has also this feeling that some humanity has taken a wrong turn. What's the wrong turn that humanity took? This is the essence of our discovery, our inquiry. As far as I can understand those dialogues, the diagnosis Kay makes is that the wrong turn humanity took is to adopt time as becoming, as the way of existence. That there it went wrong. So the whole teachings in many ways is aimed at dissolving this deception, this false assumption concerning being and time, and therefore restoring the wholeness of humanity, if that's possible, which is intelligence. Right?
Thank you. Thank you, Javier. There is a question from Shakti ji from Rajghat. So before I go to Mr. Dinesh Waghmare and Dr. Harshad Parekh, his question is, when K uses the term psychological time, does he imply directed as well as mechanical thoughts? of past and future, or does it cover something else also?
What was the question again?
When K uses the term psychological time, does he imply or is it directed as well as towards mechanical thought of past and future, or does it cover something else also?
Psychological time for K, I think, is fundamentally based on thought, based on memory. And he has this movement of aiming at going from what is to what should be. He usually brings it down to that, is interestingly enough. So inbuilt in that is always the notion of becoming. There's a mechanicalness to it because thought is mechanical essentially. Because it's based on memory, it has a rigid element in it. You see, memory is fluctuates, but more or less it has a fixity to it. So there's a static element in the fact that thought relies on memory, is based on memory. Memory is like a record. So if you ask me a question, the record responds. That is fairly mechanical, repetitive. You see, thought is condemned to be repetitive. Why is thought repetitive? Maybe we should ask a question instead. Why is thought so repetitive? Haven't we all had the experience of suddenly realizing at certain time in our life that our consciousness, what we thought was ourselves, as a free thinking entity, actually is a series of repeating patterns of thought? Psychologically, we are a repeating pattern, series of repeating patterns of thought. So the mechanical is inbuilt in psychological time. We think we are becoming, but we are not actually. Have we ever become anything psychologically? That's a real question. The feeling is that there's no becoming. It's an appearance that is played by thought within its own projections, and it never reaches them because it's just one fiction projecting another.
Thank you, Javier. We'll go to Dr. Harshad Parekh and then to Dinesh Waghmare. Yes, Harshad bhai, please.
Yes, are you able to hear my voice?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Javier. It is very good to listen to you. One question was asked, what is time? So I would say physics defines time as an interval between two events. Just like suppose you go on the top, then that releasing is the first event. And when that ball comes to the ground, that is the second event. And the time interval between these two events can be measured by a watch. And a person who is on the ground, he measures the time. And then there is another observer who is moving and he has a watch and he also observes the interval between these two events. His time will be different than the stationary observer. So Einstein's logical time is relative to the speed. So if a person is able to move with the speed of light, then the chronological time stops for that person. And it can be explained, but we don't have much time to explain how that is. But I would say that when light, the chronological time stops. And similarly, I feel that if a person is moving with thinking, moving with what is, that means the thinking is going on, but there is no thinker coming out as an observer, then even the psychological time comes to a stop. So that is why the teachings are about moving with what is. that choiceless awareness in which there is no psychological time. And the other thing which I want to say is that within us, I feel that there is a tremendous treasure is buried within us, but around this treasure, there are snakes, and like snakes of jealousy, fear, anger. And when a person tries to look within, he sees these snakes and he gets frightened and he doesn't want to look at himself. But if a person is not afraid of all these problems and can continue to look at oneself as one is without fear, without judgment, then all these snakes, they disappear, they no longer become the enemy, and one can touch the treasure which is buried within each human beings. And some human beings have been able to touch this treasure, and they have written their experiences in poems. And I don't want to go into that because there is no time. What I considered this psychological time, which is a thinking and feeling, to me it appears like a two-dimensional surface, a flat surface, and awareness or choiceless awareness or intelligence is coming out above the surface and looking at thinking and feeling very, very clearly. So that choiceless awareness or intelligence, that is a real intelligence. And as long as that intelligence is not awakened, we will be, our thinking will be the enemy. And whatever we do out of confusion will create more confusion. And that is how the humanity has been going on with thinking and feeling without coming out and really looking very clearly from this intelligence. So what we have got now is only intellect, and intellect can solve some problems, but in solving these problems, it creates more problems. So only solution is coming out and coming out to that intelligence which can govern the intellect, and then the intellect moves in a proper direction and can solve the problem without creating more problems. Okay, I have said enough thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. There's more of a comment. Would you like to say something, Javier, or we go to next question?
No, just to thank Dr. Parekh for having added that. You see, that's important. There's always, when one makes a presentation, there's so many things that are missing. So it's very important, and that what you brought in is very, very significant. So thanks for that. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Dinesh ji, please go ahead.
Are you able to listen to me, Mr. Javier?
What? Yes, I hear you.
I basically want to question this today's subject, whether time is really the enemy. Because as you yourself said, that thought is a mechanical process. So similarly, time is also a mechanical process. You said that superficial layer, there is a there is a layer which is of our conscious mind. Then there is a underneath layer of memory. Then there is an underneath layer of desire. Then there is a layer of void. But this void, we are calling it void because we don't have the right instrument. So even you also yourself said that time is an aspect of the total this thing, as JK has also said. So time is also sort of a mechanical thing. We are just registering it, or we are just looking at it. So basically the ignorance, either my ignorance, or I don't have the right instrument to go into that void and assessing the agency which is creating the whole issue or whole problem. Because if I tackle that ignorance, or I has access to that agency which is creating all this aspect of time, then that is the right culprit, I think. What do you have to say on this?
Hmm. It's a complex question you're asking. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, quite right. I mean, it's if I start by saying that time is the enemy, I already have prejudiced the issue. So I wouldn't want to prejudice the issue by calling time the enemy. But I think that comes from a certain examination of what time does with us or what we do with it, right? Like identity is time, and identity divides. So maybe time per se, memory per se, is not a problem in itself. That's a question, right? Maybe that's part of your question. That is, I have a memory of having been bullied. But that memory is not just a factual memory of having been bullied. That bullying, the memory of it, constitutes part of my identity. So that either I become aggressive in reaction to that, or I develop a certain sense of inferiority and self pity as a result of having been bullied. It has consequences and it remains entrenched in the very nature of the psyche, such that I am defined by that experience. So the totality of me, as human beings are totality, whatever that is being reduced systematically by this field of experience and time. I can no longer meet relationship properly anymore because I feel self-pity, so I am timid because of that, or else I am an aggressive person. So again, not meeting relationship properly because of my reaction to that experience. So time psychologically, and look what comes to us through our culture. We accept caste, we accept division, we accept authority, we accept corruption. Time imposes on us a certain structure of behavior which is self-defeating and essentially hypocritical, because we mean one thing and do another systematically. You can see that's the structure of society. Everywhere, huh? So psychologically, we're maybe the same as well. That time, even psychologically, is not a unit. If it was a unit, right? Like memory functions quite happily together. And that's the idea, that there is perception, feeling, thought, action, operating as an unbroken whole. This is part of our attempt as human beings to live properly, ethically, with integrity, compassion, and intelligence in the world. Well, what happens? The sensation gets translated by memory into something else than what it is. The concepts then interfere with that memory and again do another translation, and the action, being conditioned by that past, is not meeting the actual present. So we are missing each other. We're missing the actuality time and time again because the memory distorts perception. A simple thing like this distorts the whole spectrum of action, becomes our enemy. We become our enemies because we don't respond adequately to what is. By that very distortion that time as past introduces into perception, feeling, and thought. See? So see, that's why, but the idea is that they would work perfectly together. But what has to come first, you see? Perception maybe has to come first. The perception is the only thing that can determine the adequacy of memory to what is actually there. If life repeated itself, then all we would need is memory that matched that repetition, and we would just keep acting like machines, then we'll be okay. But life is not like that. Life is not repeating. Only certain factors are repeating. We have gotten also psychologically used to seek security in repetition, in continuity, in the mechanical, in the safety of that which we can control. So the past becomes important as the factor of security. But life will not let us rest in our past. All those walls of the past and safety of belief and idea and identity are therefore falsified by the very newness that life brings every day from moment to moment. The creative is inbuilt in life itself, and the past is not creative. So there you have it. If the question is this, if we want to live, and this is our intent, I think, as human beings, this is interesting also, isn't it? That we don't only want to live mechanically, that we understand implicitly, inherently, that the mechanical way of living is self-destructive because it doesn't meet life, destroys our relationships, destroys nature, destroys everything. What doesn't it destroy? It destroys the psyche itself, destroys that quality of integrity whereby knowledge should be functioning together with this emptiness in which intelligence, thought operating as a function of intelligence, not taking the whole space. This may be our fundamental mistake. But as Dr. Parekh was suggesting, for that to happen, we have to be as fast as light. That's why only the enlightened really manage this. But you see, this is beautiful because we do the question of speed is inbuilt in this. The Krishnamurti used to tell us this, right? He said, all right, he put it very simply to us when we were students at Brockwood. He said, all right, what is faster? The question of speed. What is faster, perception or thought? You see something, and then the memory comes. But the memory is later. See, this what Dr. Parekh was talking about, beautiful thing to consider, that scientifically even, time is considered as the interval between two events. So here you have it, right? Perception, thought. Tak, time comes into the picture, right? But he said, so what is primary is perception. And watch that. Be aware of the interval. To be aware of the interval, you see, is part of this, that what you're asking also, Dinesh, of this emptiness is in that interval. So the awareness, the speed of awareness of this very movement is part of our intelligence, because it's what's going to determine whether the response of memory is adequate or not, whether we betray our own interests that way, or we are whole in our action. So the enemy is gone. Hopefully.
Thank you, Javier. Javier, Prasad sir, yes sir, go ahead.
Sir, the lecture is at a very highly sophisticated level, but my question is very simple. K has always said we have to die to the past. The normal human instinct is to respect parents, to love parents, and when they become ancestors, when they pass away and become ancestors, we turn our affection doesn't cease. So they still figure in our thoughts. So to that extent, we are living in the past. And Krishnaji has spoken about his memory of his brother, dead brother, how he loved him and all that. But ultimately he says, I live on the carcass. I'm living on a dead carcass, he said. So, where do we stand with reference to past, dying to the past, and our affections for our ancestors? Some clarifications, sir, from you.
Well, I seek the same clarification as you do. But it's always, as you said, it's always helpful to try and bring it down to the actualities of our lives, because we can fly into very sophisticated, indeed, visions, which are important also, because there are degrees of subtlety. But one of the factors that you say, and you bring in very concretely, is this attachment that we have to the people, this affectionate attachment, so-called, to the people we have known, to our ancestors, to our partners. So that's an important thing, how time is inbuilt there, how our memories are inbuilt. Even Kay had this supposedly with his brother, right? When his brother died, he collapsed, supposedly, according to the accounts, collapsed completely. Now, he was already on to something else. This was in 1925, and since 1922, he was already on this journey of total liberation, right? So maybe he was always there, but now something radically different was happening. So even he had to go through that, the depth of sorrow at the death of his brother. So how deep this goes, this is part of my question. See, I was married once and my wife died. And that sorrow lasted for 10 years. So how long these things remain? And I was maybe lucky that after 10 years, sort of there was an inner liberation from sorrow, right? When I was able somehow, through the quietness of, was in Vasanta Vihar, by the way. I was doing the deep meditation in Vasanta Vihar, you see, because I needed to take stock of my life. And you see why one needs to take stock of one's life, because all that past becomes a burden, becomes such an oppressive weight upon consciousness. It's like one is not living anymore except in the past. This is really the question, isn't it? How much do we live in the past? So that sorrow was so deeply entrenched that it was continuing, going on. How does that happen? I wasn't even conscious necessarily of it. Consciousness has its layers, deposits things deep down. There they stay, and one has to be able to access that to be free from the past. This is part of the thing. So I was leading a very quiet life, meditative life in Vasanta Vihar, and one night I had this dream of being with my ex, my wife who had died, and experiencing a profound sense of beauty. And I woke up in the bed with my body just shaking uncontrollably and tears just pouring out of my eyes like nothing. Somehow that was the liberation of that sorrow, its energy trapped in the very body itself, that somehow through that quietness, through that contemplative life, was able to flower and be freed. And in fact, it was a moment both of sorrow, but of beauty. Sorrow, when it's touched and lived through, explodes into beauty. There's a tremendous thing to discover. So that dying to the past, you see, has this quality of a transformative feeling. There is beauty when one touches that, liberates the sorrow that the past contains. So dying to the past is freedom and beauty. But you see, the question is, and I am still on to it, how deep does that go? Because it's not just my memory, this was my memory. But how many more memories are there, which are not even mine? The ancestors have also put their memories there. I may have to die to that too, to all my ancestors, so that I have no ancestry whatsoever. The new human being K calls for, no? So this is a great question. I'm not giving you an answer because I don't have an answer, because we have to go there. And that was just one little layer. And look how it took 10 years for something that would say to be private and personal, but so profoundly rooted in that psyche. It took 10 years and then 2 years of quietness for it to explode into beauty and be free. So we have to keep going, see? There's no formula as far as I know, but we do have to keep paying attention and realizing the depth of the deposit of memory of time that consciousness is, and how that limits us, shapes us, becomes the burden of our lives, and prevents love and freedom.
Thank you, sir.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Javier. We'll take Rajshekhar ji, please go ahead, ask your question. Rajshekhar ji.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
First, I want to convey that our today's speaker, Javier sir, my hats up to him. We are hearing about the time many times, psychological time, relative time, levels of consciousness and how psychological time is the enemy, and so many aspects of things have been covered very nicely, and probably he has made it crystal clear. Of course, there is many things to go ahead still for that. Probably he is one of the lecture. I'm fortunate today also I got connected to this lecture. Sir, coming to that, even his memory of wife, and what is that experience suddenly ending up sorrow. This is also one of the greatest happening in his, not only in his life, that narration to us also brings back, reveals to us what is that ending of sorrow. These are all aspects really. I am very fortunate to hear this. Coming to what I wanted to speak, as today's topic is time and relative time. See, let me, the memory, again a time factor, but to express or to communicate, to have to go to back to our memory, my childhood memory. That is in 1960s when I was a child and when I was studying in high school stage, my father was telling certain aspects now and then, and what they have read was Bala Siksha that time. In his study time, maybe in 1930s or 40s, my father at that time it was in 50s when I was young child of age of 12, 13, 14. They were studying Bala Siksha, small Bala Siksha. Bala Siksha, everybody understands. Small Bala Siksha and big Bala Siksha. Means that was the curriculum. And somehow, I don't know, my father's uncle, paternal uncle was the first teacher in our village, and our house, when newly constructed, was the first school in our village. So he was telling that relative time. You see, I heard that a day for us is a seconds to some other place, and a year for us is a day in some other planets or some other loka. They used to call a loka. That lokas, 14 lokas are divided, and that one day means our hundreds of years is one day in some other loka is astonishing figures. I could not comprehend at that time, but it has gone into my memory and I never forgot about it. Because of my studies in high school stage, I had to read other curriculums. But I was reading, I could not read that Bala Siksha and all that because of other way. Why I am sharing means this relative aspect of time was not only now in a scientific field explaining about the cosmology, planets, three-dimensional cosmic, this one, what our time connected with our globe, even our places from place to place, distant place, time is different in our globe itself. Then the time for Saturn, or time in moon, time with other places are very, very different. They're all relative. It is a very astonishing, means in the olden days, maybe hundreds and thousands years back, all these were our maybe great sages of not only India. I am not talking in as our present speaker told one name. I don't remember that he also narrated in the past how he has explained the time.
I'm
So
sorry to
thank you, sir. I just wanted to share all these aspects. Thank you, sir, for giving me time.
Okay, we'll take just one
Sir,
more
would
question.
you please take Pradeep Verma first?
Yes, I'll take Pradeep Vermaji's question first. And
Yeah.
if time permits, we can take others because it's already close to 12:30 now. So, Mr.
Yeah.
Pradeep Verma, please go ahead.
Yes. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are.
Yes, sir. Javier, you beautifully expressed before the talk, living with oneself is something like living with a cobra. Is it the fear of death or love of cobra? That is the question. And another, a small observation, during our day-to-day living, even after understanding fairly well what Case saw and talked about, we have no time to see the layers of consciousness, this concept of linearity and vertical nature of timelessness. We don't know exactly when, which layer is this consciousness, which layer of consciousness is seeing and listening to, although we have been emphasizing what is, always what is, then the topic started with history and almost ended with history. Please, if you can clarify a little bit about that cobra and the how we live actually in day-to-day life without quoting any one of these things or even cognizant of. Thank you.
You ask such deep questions. Now, this thing about living with a cobra, well, I think you would be more better expert than I. Here in the West, we don't have cobras. We have vipers, but these vipers are very shy. But look, I once watched a film about India. It was a particular thing in a village where there was a king cobra. And the cobras are sacred, right? They represent Shiva, the energy of Shakti, and all that. So there is all that myth. Look at it. The cobras in Indian mythology are not the enemy. They may be dangerous in their own way, but actually they represent a quality of energy that is associated with the divine. And therefore they become worshipped. But we also, it's an element of fear, and we worship what we fear. Because what we fear is what has power over us. And if we worship it, then we think to placate it and to prevent the danger that is implicit in that. I watched one program this was filmed, and it was amazing because I think the Indian culture is very extraordinary in having explored the limits of our instinctual reactions. It has done that really for thousands of years. So you have a lot of extraordinary explorations that have been done. One of the things that impressed me was this. Just see if I can be brief. Your question is long, so I want to address it properly, if I can. But one of the things was this. They filmed this priestess in the village. They had a yearly ritual whereby they brought the cobra, the king cobra, out of his hole and his lair with a bowl of milk and so on. And this priestess made a dance before this snake. And as he struck, the priestess would hold it sort of under the head. And then they would go again into the dance. And the point was for this priestess to kiss the cobra 3 times on the head. That was the ritual to ensure that there would be rain and good crops. And this priestess did that. What does it take? I was completely amazed that you do this. You can completely go past all that instinctual fear and kiss a cobra 3 times on the head. But watch now what happens to us with our cobras. Fear is its own cobra. Psychologically, are we able to kiss it 3 times on the head? You see, I'm making this thing. Look, fear is time. Right? Have you ever been really afraid? It's that fear was in connection to time. Fear of death, the cobra is death. Fear of death, kiss the fear of death 3 times on the head. This is the dance of our daily lives. And if we don't do that, there won't be rain. There won't be the joy of freedom. And there will be no crop. Mankind will continue to destroy. We had to meet fear. See through fear to the emptiness that underlies the movement of escape of consciousness, which is fear of becoming in time. This is fear. This is time. This is the cobra we live with. Kiss it 3 times on the head, or it will be no rain. I just following the metaphor, right? I'm not concretely, but you can see the beauty of that psychologically we are in this dance with this cobra, and we need to kiss it 3 times on the head. It's just us. It's our fear that we have created. There are no snakes. The snake is created by the label snake. If we don't label the thing, it is already something else. It's the misperception of thought of its own movement. When we can see through it, you see, fear is an escape from that very deep, abiding emptiness in which there is freedom, in which there is rain. The other is an attempt to build a bridge of becoming over the abyss of emptiness. But the emptiness is always there, and the bridge is a fiction. There's no becoming. There is no cobra. There is just the emptiness beneath. If we can really touch that, but for that to happen, you have to go through fear. You have to kiss the cobra.
Thank you, Javier.
I leave you, of course, with a very tough job, huh? But it's possible. And as I say, especially the Indian background is very helpful in this way.
Thank you, Javier. We'll take a question from Yuga. Yuga, please go ahead. Ask your question.
Hola, Javier. Hello. I would like to ask something very simple because you were talking about violence and time related to each other. So, for example, if you were in a school in which 2 kids, one might be bullying each other, or you feel the violence. So how would you approach this in order the kids not to repeat the pattern, because it's so difficult? How I don't know if the word how is accurate, but what would be the approach? Because we are talking about, I mean, lots of theory, which is very important, but how we actually would meet that fact of 2 kids being violent, and in one school that's supposed to be, for example, trying to implement the teachings.
Yes, violence is with us. So what we're trying to do is to learn about it. Now, I happen to be one of those kids who was badly bullied in my school. Probably you were too? Who wasn't bullied?
Yeah.
You see, we can laugh now, but we couldn't laugh then. So watch. So the bullying was going on, right? And that indeed what I was talking about, creating a certain reaction. In my case, it was self-pity. It took me many years to come upon that deep-rooted memory that had become central to my psychological identity and to be free from it. You have to go deep into the content of consciousness. Consciousness has to access itself to be free from its content. This is part of the art of going inwardly into ourselves. Okay? Happily for me, it happened. So there it was, this freedom from the self-pity, which is part of sorrow. See, this is all sorrow, the stream of sorrow in which we're caught. And violence is inbuilt, is intrinsic to the stream of sorrow that we impose upon ourselves and that generation after generation we perpetuate. Not just war, but bullying, insult, the whole thing is sorrow. So to end the sorrow, to end violence is important. Now, what I did in the school, me and my friends in our school, when we were the older guys, because it was the older bullying the younger, right? So when I was the younger, I was bullied. But when I was the older, we got together and I proposed that there be no more violence in our school, no more bullying. And we ended it completely. because we talked together and we said, no more bullying. We didn't fight among ourselves and we didn't allow the little ones to fight among themselves. We said, no violence. We stopped. But unfortunately, when my generation went out of the school, the bullying got back in there. I was shocked because I said, we did something radical. We, out of intelligence, out of concern, we were 12 years old, but we saw something very clearly and we were of one mind because we all were victims. But you see, that's why communication is very important. Dialogue. Society organizes itself, colludes into maintaining violence by not talking about it. If you start talking about it, you realize how horrible it is. And then everybody knows the horror of it, and then we can do something together. So the communication was important. It was somebody had to take the word and say, this is horrible. We have all been suffering under this regime, and this keeps carrying on. And everybody says, yes. The word is important in establishing the oneness of mind. When the experience is common, to establish that bridge among people is fundamental for social transformation. This is one example, simple example. Unfortunately, that wasn't continued somehow. The moment we went, there it was. That's what I heard later, after I had gone. One kid came to me and said, I was so badly bullied. He was much younger. He came much later than us. When I was there, when my generation was the oldest, nothing like that was allowed to happen. And we didn't do it, none of us. So there you are. You have to be yourself free from violence. To approach the violence of another, and as a teacher and in a school, then you have to be free from violence. You have to understand the dimensions of violence. You have to go to them and understand why they're violent. Maybe they are being also bullied at home. Violence is everywhere. It's at home. It's in society. Almost every home is a nucleus of violence. So the poor kids get all that coming at them. And you know, when we are young, we tend to also adopt really kind of reactive patterns. We fall into reactive patterns. So to help the child to understand why they are already in that reactive pattern is very important. To see not only the implications, but the reactive pattern, right? Can one see that? Because we justify it already. You can see a child who is aggressive already will have a reason why he's aggressive. And that's conditioning, though. So the reason is not a reason. There is something else. We have to be going through those justifications that we give ourselves in order to maintain this destructive pattern of behavior. So, I mean, it's much more complicated because they depend on the case, depends on the background of the child. But all the adult has to be very aware of himself as to how much violence there is still there. And then talking to the child has to also keep an eye on himself, very close eye. He's also the snake, you see. You see, we're trying to resolve the problems of others while we don't resolve our own. But consciousness is a set of tubes that are communicating continuously at the subterranean level. And while I may be very wise in my mind, I may be conveying a completely different feeling underneath. I have to be aware at all those levels in order to help a child to be free from all those levels also in himself. It is that complex. You have to reach them at a much deeper level than the conscious self-machination, self-justifying mechanism. And that's the task of it. That's the challenge for any teacher in any Krishnamurti school.
Thank you, Javier.
Okay.
We are way past our time, so I'll take a brief comment from Harshad Bhai and then we'll close. Harshad ji, please go ahead.
Yes, about the title and inquiry into the nature of time. Now, what is this inquiry? Because if it is just thinking, then, and time is also thinking, then it seems to me that by talking, discussing, only thinking exists, then how is it possible to come out from this thinking and see the thinking clearly? So to me, that coming out from thinking and looking at thinking, that seems to be the real inquiry, and that happens when we continue. And there may be an intellectual clarity, but the real clarity may be lacking. Okay, I finish.
Thank you. Thank you, Harshad Bhai. I think we have come to the close of the session now. I want to thank Javier once again profusely for sparing his time and being with us today. And maybe a few months from now, I'll again write to Javier requesting him to give us some more time. With these words, I close this. And next Sunday, we have Mr. Amresh Kumar. He's the trustee of KFI at Shayadri School. He'll be talking about awakening of intelligence. So if you have time, please do join us. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dubey.
Namaste.
Thank you very much, Javier sir.
Thank you.
Thank
all of you.
Thanks to everyone.
Bye bye.
Thanks.
Modak, you may close now.